Good morning, everybody. We are live with John Ruske today, and John is the assistant principal clarinet player of the Chicago Symphony. John has the longest tenure of any clarinetist ever with the Chicago Symphony, and I'm just really excited to talk to him. The purpose of these fireside chats is that I wanted to bring hope to people. I named it the Fireside Chat because during the Second World War, our president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, had these chats on the radio and was offering hope to people. And here's John now. He's one of the most positive people I know. Get a lot out of this interview today, but just his happiness, his positivity, and I just love him to death. And you guys are going to enjoy hearing from him. Hey, John, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Oh, I'm great. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. Since
I'm just going to turn the volume up a little bit so I can hear you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, the Fireside Chats. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, World War II.
Yes, and that's
boost.
You know, honestly, it's just a way for me to kind of reach out and offer some inspiration to people. And you know, what better person to offer some hope and some positivity than you, man?
Well, I mean, you have been spreading the hope and positivity, and as you know, I'm a sort of incorrigible optimist, and I just love that about you too. That you've come into the orchestra and just getting to know you about, a year and a half or so. It's been like,
sorry, I'm just getting everything set up here. There you go. Perfect.
You play and join our amazing section. It's just like. It's so fantastic, and then keeping in touch like this, it's just such a wonderful thing. If we can't be next to each other on stage, then we can pretty much be next to each other. We're even closer now.
Oh man, well, I'm looking forward to just getting to know you a little bit better and hearing about your experiences in the orchestra and how you came to the orchestra, and also any words of wisdom you can offer to young musicians. So let's get started. First of all, I mean, I didn't know this, but you've been in the orchestra for 43 years.
Yep, I joined in June of 1977. I joined in May, and I joined after the orchestra returned from their first Japanese tour. Wow. And I started at Ravinia in 1977. So yeah, this is in June of this year. I'll be beginning my 44th season.
Holy smokes, man. Congratulations.
Well, thanks a lot. It's gone by pretty quickly, but then, a lot has happened too.
Yes. So I heard that you are the longest tenured clarinet player ever in the history of the Chicago Symphony. That's what I read. You've been in the orchestra the longest of any clarinet player.
Yep. There's been, I mean, we've had members of the orchestra in other sections that have stayed, way longer, like Dick Graff just retired after 53 years in the flute section, and obviously Bud Herseth for 54 years, and then, I mean, Jay Friedman's been there almost 60 years. It's just like,
wow. Yeah, Jay joined in, 1962, right?
So these great colleagues are an amazing inspiration to me and to everybody. It's just like to be with them on stage and to uphold the incredible CSO standard is just a privilege for me. I consider every day a privilege and an inspiration to be with such amazing colleagues. Wow. And it's just like it's a celebration. It's like Dan Gingrich said so nicely. He said, the result that we get is far greater than the sum of the parts. So it's like we make magic when we're together, and this is magic. Just to be talking to you so close like this, and yeah, I mean, it's just when I joined the orchestra, it was a totally different group of individuals, and we had a music director that was so strong. He was probably the quintessential music director of all, Sir George Schulte, and he gave me my career. He hired me. And so I was just 19 when I auditioned for the orchestra. I had taken a few auditions before, and this just happened to be being in the right place at the right time. It was like,
it certainly was, John. Wow. So let's back up a little bit and just tell me a little bit about your first introduction to music. You were born in California or Washington, D.C.?
Well, I was actually born in Washington, D.C.,
Okay.
lived there for 2 years until we moved to California. So I spent probably the majority of my youth in Los Angeles.
Wow.
But my parents, they met in Washington, D.C., and, they had both emigrated from China during the 1940s and 50s to come to America to go to school. So I'm the first generation American in our family.
Wow.
And they met in Washington, D.C., and I was born in 1957 and in Georgetown University Hospital at Washington, D.C. And my parents told me, they used to take me strolling in the stroller, and they used to see Senator John F. Kennedy going down the street. They lived around the corner from him. He would be pushing his little John, and it was just like, wow. In those days, it was a delightful place to spend my first couple of years, and I attended my first concert, and tip of the hat to the National Symphony Orchestra.
Yes, yeah, who's going through a difficult time right now. Yeah, absolutely. I would love to reach out to them and really support them. I know, some of my dear friends, Marcus Osterland, one of the horn players, Abel Pereira. I mean, all those guys, but yeah, some of my classmates.
Doug, there he is now.
Yeah.
Hey, all right. I love you. It's like, but last time we actually played in the Kennedy Center was a few years ago, and we stayed in the Watergate Hotel, and I had a room that, Teresa and Mia were with me at the time, and I said, hey, look out the window of my room. That's the place I was born. We could actually see Georgetown University Hospital, the tower from the hospital. I said, that's my birthplace. Just looking out the hotel window.
Unbelievable. Yeah. So how did you go to California? Your parents probably moved for work, or
yeah. So my dad was an engineer. He was working in the aerospace industry at the time, and it was sort of big at the time. And there were some companies in LA that wanted his expertise and skill, And so he's a fluid mechanic specialist, which means like he basically towards the end of his career, he designed airplanes,
Yes.
airplanes and things like that. And then during the middle of his career, he worked on buildings like nuclear reactor shells, for example, to protect against earthquakes. And so at the beginning of his career, he was in the aerospace industry, and he worked on, I don't know actually what he worked on because it was top secret. Go into his office, and there'd be, it's like you have to have a special top secret clearance to go in. And so a lot of this stuff was proprietary information, but I just knew he worked for Thomson Ramo Wooldridge, which became TRW. And now we know TRW for some reason as a credit check company, but in those days they were into the space program, and they were making satellites and things like that. And so my dad was involved with that. So we moved out to Los Angeles after, while I was 2. But getting back to Washington, D.C., that's where I actually attended my first concert. When I was about, 1.5, my parents took me to the kiddie concerts at the National Symphony Orchestra.
Oh, man.
They did Peter the Wolf, and it was like, it could have been my teacher, Harold Wright, playing. I don't know who specifically was playing, but Buddy Wright, who was principal clarinet of the Washington National Symphony for several years, could have been playing on that day when I attended my first concert.
Unbelievable.
So, yeah, it was Howard Mitchell conducting. He was the conductor of the National Symphony at the time. And so the only reason I know this is because my parents have kept really good records of and photographs. Oh, here's Johnny going to his first concert. Here's Johnny going to the beach when he was 5 months old. All these baby pictures and stuff like that. And so shortly afterwards, we moved to California. I started going to school, and then the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion opened in Los Angeles, which is where the Los Angeles Philharmonic had its first permanent home. Mm-hmm. And they took me to I was like 5, and they took me to one of the opening concerts of that. And I just they played, Don Quixote with Gregor Piatigorsky, and I was like, and they played Beethoven's Fifth, and this was with Zubin Mehta, and I was like, I'm sitting, and we had really good, seats, and it was like not way up front, but in like the loge, the first balcony, and it was like, wow, this is amazing sound, and then I came home and I would pore over the program and look at the names of all the. Well, this is like maybe later when I was like 12 or 13, and I started to get really interested in playing music and getting into playing orchestra. So I'd look through these programs and say, oh yeah, that's Kuhlmann Block, he was principal clarinet, and Sinclair Lott was principal horn player, and they in the same program they listed other things they were going to do, and they were going to do on Heldenleben, and it was like all these things that I look back on and I said, yeah, I had a great hometown orchestra. And then when I was in high school, I'd go to concerts every week. They'd sell student tickets and you could sit in the front row, for like $2 or something like that. Because I don't know, first of all, Dorothy Chandler Pavilion was a pretty big place. Yeah. And usually people wanted to sit up in the loge, but I got to sit in the front row. And I remember seeing the Rite of Spring. Wow. With Zubin conducting and sitting like so close to the orchestra, and it was like, oh wow, this is the life,
Unbelievable.
But then when I went to college, all throughout high school, I was interested in playing music and playing chamber music and playing the orchestra. I was in the American Youth Symphony in LA. We rehearsed at UCLA, and our music director was Meli Mehta, who is the father of Zubin and Zarin Mehta. And so Meli was my, I learned everything about orchestra playing from Meli, and going Saturday mornings to rehearse with the American Youth Symphony. And it was a great, incredible education in itself. I made, really good friends there. We played chamber music, but somehow kind of in the back of my mind, it was like, I'm going to be a scientist, and I'm going to go to, my parents said, you'll probably go to medical school. And I said, yeah, you're right. I'm pretty good at that. So I was good at math. I was good at physics and biology and chemistry and all that stuff. So sure enough, I enrolled at UCLA, and I was a pre-med major. So I studied pre-med for a couple of time I was there. I'd play in all the university, the university orchestra, the university chamber orchestra. I won all the music awards, and I wasn't even a music major. So some of these music majors were kind of looking at me askance and going, "Who's this guy?" And I got, at that time, I won the Frank Sinatra Musical Performance Award at UCLA. No. So Frank Sinatra, believe it or not, had gone to UCLA and endowed this award. So every year they'd give an award for the Frank Sinatra Musical Performance Award, and I won in 1974. And so I'm my daughter's waving at me.
Hey. Well, John, this is a good transition for us to talk about family and how important your family was to you when you were coming up as a musician, but also how important your family is now. And like, you have some really successful daughters. Like your family just, I'm blown away. One of your daughters is Molly Ye from, Girl Meets Farm. And, your other daughter is a really successful young flautist. So I'm sorry to interrupt you on your story, but if you wouldn't mind backing up, I would love to hear the story about your father doing anything for you for your clarinet.
Oh, right. Okay, that story, but I'll tell you. My parents were incredibly supportive of me, of everything that I wanted to do, and because they instilled in me really good values. They loved music. They totally. How many languages do I speak? Hey, Howard Pink. Oh my gosh, all these people are Howard Pink. I have to tell a story about you. Pink's Produce in Las Vegas. Anyway, how many languages? Okay, I'll get back to you about that. Очень приятно. Good morning, all those. That's pretty much it. And the universal language of music. So my parents spoke Chinese in the household. They came from China, and they Mandarin was was their native language. So I heard that, and before I went to school with the American kids, I was sort of bilingual. But then as soon as I went to school with American kids, I sort of let Chinese slip. So I still, to this day, wish I could speak Chinese well enough to carry on a conversation past ordering in a restaurant. That I could do. But in any case, my parents were so supportive of everything that I did, especially musically. You know, my my dad, called Mele Meta and got me an audition for the American Youth Symphony when I was 13. So I was like the youngest member of the American Youth Symphony, and all these other kids were like in college. So I got to sit at the end of the clarinet section and learn a lot. And then I was, when I was, let's see, so I was 12, I went to sleepaway camp for the first time. It was music camp at Idlewild. So there's this beautiful music camp called ISOMATA. It was Idlewild School of Music and the Arts. And it was run by the USC, University of Southern California, music department. So they had really, really good faculty and very good, in a beautiful location up in the San Bernardino Mountains. So this is like about a 3-hour drive from our home in West Los Angeles. So I was so excited, you know, I'm going to go for 6 weeks to this sleepaway camp. And I got all my music together, and, you know, I had to get together, you know, appropriate clothing, and you know, brought my music stand, and so packed it all in the car, and we're driving up to Idlewild and listening to the radio. We always used to listen to KFAC, which was the music station in Los Angeles. And so my dad and I are just, you know, chatting and listening to music and looking at the beautiful scenery. And we get there, and the fresh air, and we unpacked the car and into the cabin. They had these little A-frame cabins. So I packed into the cabin all my music and my clothes and my music stand. And then I said, Daddy, where's my clarinets? He said, well, you got everything out of the car. And I said, hey, wait a minute. Where's my clarinets? And I said, wait a minute. So I look all around the cabin and I said, wait, where's my clarinets? And we looked around the car, and maybe it's behind the back seat. No, oh my gosh. So he said, well, maybe you better call your mom. And so I called and I said, Mommy, Daddy and I are here in Idlewild. I said, I can't find my clarinets. She goes, oh, let me go look in your room. Oh, they're here. Oh my gosh. I said, you mean I left my clarinets when I went to music camp?
The only thing you needed for music camp, right? Just yourself and your clarinet, and you forgot to
have the most important thing. And so my mom said, well, you know, maybe your dad will have to come back and get them. And my dad said, yeah, I'll go home and get them for you.
Oh man, that means so much, man. Your parents are willing to do anything for you.
So I mean, that pretty much tells the story about my dad.
So they drove how many hours one way?
Hours back to Westwood, and 3 hours back to Idlewild, and then 3 hours back. So he drove like literally 12 hours that day, back and forth, just so I could, first of all, get there, and so that I could have my instruments there.
Oh wow. And that's the dedication that you have for your children. That it's so apparent that you're so dedicated, and I think that's kind of what kids need to be successful in music, is that sort of family support and that dedication. I know my mom sacrificed a lot for me, but it's just it's unbelievable to hear about that. And yeah. Well,
you know, the other thing is that you know, this was after I've been at college for a couple of years at UCLA, you know, studying chemistry and biology and physics and calculus. You know, I was starting to get a little bit, and at the same time playing music, and music gave me so much joy. And, you know, maybe calculus and physics gave me satisfaction that I could probably get a passing grade. But I said, look, I want to do this all the time. I want to be playing orchestra. I want to be playing chamber music. So I did some research on my own. In those days, it was like there wasn't the internet and stuff. So I rode away to these music schools like Curtis at your alma mater, and Juilliard, and where my idol was teaching at Boston University. Harold was teaching at Boston University, and I got like their catalogs. They used to have a catalog, and you could read through them. And I used to like have these by my bedside and look and see what classes I could take at Juilliard and what classes I could take. And they'd show pictures of, the front of the Curtis Institute. And I'd dream about that. And yet I was a little bit apprehensive. So I went to my counselor at, they had like guidance counselors at UCLA even. And I said, I'm into this. And Howard Pink. I was at Aspen Music Festival. Well, I'm going to get to that because Aspen was a huge turning point for me. Mm-hmm. This was like, okay, so after I went to Aspen, after I graduated from high school, I went to Aspen for my first time. And I won the concerto competition there. And I played the Weber Concertino with the Philharmonia at Aspen under Herbert Blomstedt. If you know who Herbert Blomstedt is.
We just played Brahms 2 with him.
You just did Brahms 2 with him in CSO. This guy at that time was like 40. He is now 93.
Wow.
He has more energy now at the age of 93 than he did like 47 years ago when I was Aspen. But he was the conductor of the orchestra that I got to play with. And at the first note, I knew, oh, this is really special. So I digress, because after that summer, during that summer, people were saying, so, where are you going to go to music school? Are you going to go to conservatory? Because I just graduated from high school. I said, no, I'm going to UCLA, and I'm in the pre-med program. What? They said, you got to be kidding. I said, no, I love music, but it's going to be my hobby. And they said, that's probably not right. People were saying like, no, you can study medicine later. You got to take your talent and you have to develop it, and you have to do it now because you have a gift that you have to share.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, I love my my music, and I am passionate about it, and I just am having such a great time this summer at Aspen. But that thought in my mind had kind of like worked on me, and after a year and a half in pre-med, I got up the courage and I sat at dinner one day and I said to my parents, I've been thinking of transferring to a music school and like conservatory. And they kind of looked at each other, and it seemed like forever, but it was like 20 seconds, and they said, my dad said, Johnny, we want you to be happy. And I said, I just kind of looked at them, and he said, you know what? If you do your best, we will support you.
Wow.
And it was like that besides their genes was the best gift my parents ever gave to me. It was their support. Oh, hello, Kitty. Oh, hello.
This is Muffy.
Oh, Buffy, what a nice kitty.
Yeah, she's the best, man.
I let my Ziggy out of his kennel. He's going to be all over the place. So I'll show you Ziggy in a minute. We have a puppy.
Oh,
being a very good boy in his kennel. Good boy. So anyway, my parents gave me the gift of a lifetime.
Yeah.
Their support when I decided to go a different route than they had dreams for me. I was going to be, a doctor that they never were. My mom had gone to medical school, but she did not finish medical school, and she became a hematologist. It was a hematology in a lab. She was like a lab technician, but she did not finish medical school, and so she foresaw in me not only the ability, but the potential to kind of carry on her dream. But both my parents had studied music when they were young. My mom, always talked about her piano teacher. He was in China. He was a German guy named Kupka. Kupka would say this, and Kupka would make me play Hanon, and Kupka would do this. And so when I was 5, I got to start on piano lessons, but that apparently did not go well. Because I didn't have I just don't know what happened. We didn't click, my piano teacher and I. But in second grade, I was 6 years old, and I was in second grade, and they offered orchestra instruments. So somehow the clarinet came to me, and I got a really good patient clarinet teacher at the beginning. Gordon Harrott was his name. He would, bless his heart, he was so patient with me and taught me all the ropes. And then after a few years with him, he said, you know, I've taught you everything I can teach you. Time for you to get another teacher. So my dad called Mitchell Lurie, who was like the big clarinet teacher at that time in LA. He had played in the Chicago Symphony. He was the principal clarinetist in 1948 in the Chicago Symphony. So at this time he was the professor at USC.
Wow.
And he happened to live like maybe half a mile from our house. So my dad called him up and he said, Mr. Lurie, I have a very young, talented son. He'd like to take clarinet lessons. Do you think you might have time with him? And he said, well, I'm really busy, but there's another clarinet teacher that moved to town recently. His name is Gary Gray, and he's the professor at UCLA. And I said, oh, UCLA, you know, that's where, right up the street. And it turned out that Gary Gray would be my clarinet teacher for the next 10 years. And he, my dad called him up and he said, okay, come over for my lesson. Johnny can come over for his lesson next Wednesday. And here's my address. Turns out he lived literally half a block from us on our street.
No kidding. No kidding.
My lesson took me like 15 seconds to walk over to my lesson, and I'd have my first year, but after about a year he moved like further away, so we had to drive. But Gary Gray was a huge influence on me, and he was the one that got me to go to Aspen because he was on the faculty at the Aspen Festival. And so that was a big turning point.
Isn't it funny how these coincidences have lined up throughout your career and throughout your life? I mean, just you happen to see opportunity presented, but then you take advantage of it. And it's like opportunity, hard work, and, you know, persistence, attitude.
The thing is that versatility also figures into that because, you know, when I made my decision to tell my parents that I wanted to go to music school, it was too late to apply to most schools for the next fall. But Juilliard happened to have an opening for bass clarinet. They didn't have any more major availabilities in their clarinet, but they could apply as a bass clarinet major, and they had that. So I had luckily been given the opportunity by Meli Mehta to play the bass clarinet in the American Youth Symphony, and I was ready. So I said, okay, I'll go audition on bass clarinet, and I got into Juilliard on bass clarinet. And my teacher, Joe Allard, he was in the NBC Symphony before he started teaching at Juilliard, and he taught clarinet, bass clarinet, and saxophone. And he's a legendary teacher. At the time, he was like in his mid-70s. And I was just like, okay, you know, I'd love to study bass clarinet, but I want to be a clarinet major. So I said, just go change your major. So the second day I was at Juilliard, I went down to the office and I said, I'd like to change my major. Fine, you can be a clarinet major.
So you got in the back door through the bass clarinet door, right?
The bass clarinet. And that's how I got into the Chicago Symphony.
Wow.
So in 1977, the Chicago Symphony happened to have a bass clarinet opening because suddenly my predecessor died. And that's sometimes what has to happen in a major orchestra to get a position. You have to wait for somebody to retire. They're really old, or they have to die. And so George Weber was my predecessor. He was the bass clarinetist. Oh, he must have been there for like 30 years or so in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, early 70s. And he played the German system because his teacher used to be the principal clarinet, Robert Lindemann. And anyway, one day they were recording the Bartók piano concertos with Abbado and who's the
Algerich. Is it no?
A pianist. Oh, you know, the guy that wears the trench coat. You know who I'm talking about.
No.
Maurizio Pollini.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Maurizio Pollini. So they were recording the Bartók piano concertos, and George Weber didn't show up. And it's like, where's George? You know, we're losing time here. So they called, nobody answers at his home. They went, and he was dead in his living room. Just never showed up. So shortly thereafter, they had they had to have an audition for bass clarinet, and I was ready, because at that point it was my second year at Juilliard. I'd already taken like 3 auditions before that. And my very first audition was for my hometown orchestra, Los Angeles Philharmonic, because they also had a bass clarinet opening. So it was like good practice, you know. My good friend, Dick Mackey, you know Dick Mackey?
Yes, of course.
Dick Mackey is my great friend, because he lived about 2 blocks from us, and his daughter is my sister's best friend.
No kidding. What a small world.
It's such a small world, because he was living in LA at the time, after having resigned from the Cleveland Orchestra and after having played in Japan for several years. He was living in LA, and his daughter was going to school with my sister. And I said, you know, one day my sister came back and from playing with Monica, and she goes, you know, Monica's dad knows Harold Wright. And I said, what? You got to be kidding. She goes, yeah, he like went to school with Harold Wright, or he went to Marlboro, this place called Marlboro. And I said, I know Marlboro, you know, and Harold Wright and Dick Mackey knows Harold Wright. And she goes, yeah. And she said, he says you can come over anytime. So I said, wow. So we became really, really good friends. And he used to come into the record store where I used to work in Westwood Village. I used to work at Vogue Records, and we used to talk about it. And he said, oh, you like Schoenberg? He said, I hate Schoenberg. He says, I have a recording of the wind quintet of Schoenberg, and you can have it.
No kidding.
But he said, I love Mozart, and I have all the works of Mozart on recordings, and I'm collecting all these Mozart
Partitas, sonatas, yeah.
No, I mean, he'd collect manuscripts or first editions. So he got me, he said, oh, you know, Sotheby's is having an auction, and they're selling the first edition of the Mozart Clarinet Quintet. And he said, you want me to put a bid for you? I said, sure. I said, Teresa's birthday's coming up. I said, maybe I can give that. So I got it. And so we have a first edition of the Mozart Quintet, and Dick Mackey was instrumental in getting that. So I digressed so much. So I had the opportunity to play bass clarinet in the American Youth Symphony, because Maley said, you know, we need somebody to play bass in the Cacciatorian Piano Concerto. It's got a big bass clarinet part. And I said, I'll do it if you get me a good instrument, because I didn't have a good. So they bought the best instrument possible. I mean, they bought the orchestra, and I got to use it. And that was like the beginning opportunity. It was taking advantage of the opportunity, learning a bass clarinet. Gary Gray was happy to teach me, because he had been the bass clarinet of the St. Louis Symphony before he came to LA. And so I was versatile. And then after 3 years on bass clarinet in the Chicago Symphony, I had the opportunity to move up to E flat and assistant principal, because my first year in the orchestra, which was 1977-78, was Clark Brody's last year as principal clarinet. And so, it was like the changing of the guard, you know. George Weber's gone, Clark is about to retire, and the opportunity was given to me at that point to move up, but I auditioned for E flat. And so at the time, Larry Combs, my good friend and mentor, was the E flat clarinet player, but he got to move up to principal.
Wow.
He recently enough, and he was, you know, certainly qualified to be principal, and he served in that position for so many years. And then he said, well, you know, John, you have the opportunity to move up to E flat. I said, you know, I'd love to play principal at certain times, but I don't really know the E flat that well. He says, I'll help you, you know, here, take my instrument, take my mouthpiece, take my reeds. You can play the stuff for me, and you'll be fine. And I said, okay. So he had put his trust in me, and then I got to play, you know, and those, we had we held bass clarinet auditions a couple of times, and they weren't successful. We weren't able to get somebody to fill our bass clarinet position. So I had the opportunity to play either bass or E flat in whatever came up in those couple of years. And so I had some on the job experience playing, had to play Till Eulenspiegel on the E flat or bass. They said you could either play bass or E flat, and I said, well, I'll try it on E flat. So that was really good to build my confidence. And I play, bolero, and I got to play stuff like that, and I wasn't even the official E flat clarinet player yet. So it was great that I had an opportunity, and then I got to play my audition, and then I got to move up to assistant principal and E flat, and that's when we had auditions, and we were able to get Lori Bloom, who's unfortunately retiring at the end of this season.
Oh man, Lori is like one of the greatest bass clarinet players I've ever heard. He's got so much personality, and what a sound, right?
What an amazing, beautiful friend and colleague. So, yeah. Lori, if you're watching, tip of the hat. We're gonna miss you so much.
Chapeau. Yeah. So, could you tell me a little bit about what it was like, number one, to work with Larry Combs and to work with the orchestra in that time, and the wind section at that time when you joined?
Well, the wind section was completely different at that time. When I joined the orchestra, the median age of the orchestra, I would say, was about 55. And so I'm, just turned 20, and I've been was the youngest member of the orchestra for several years until George Vosberg joined, like years after I joined, and so then he was the youngest member. But I learned so much from all these amazing colleagues. There was my clarinet section, Larry, shortly after I joined, was principal, and he literally showed me the ropes. We played a lot together while he was still assistant principal. We played a lot of first and second, and we made several recordings together in that. And then we formed the Chicago Symphony Winds along with Ray Still. Ray Still was our principal oboist, who is my all-time musical hero. Ray Still literally took me under his wing and really mentored me, and we played a lot of chamber music together, including in the Chicago Symphony Winds, and he'd give me critique, and some of it was pretty harsh. It was like, John, let me tell you, and so, but it was always positive, and it was always for the music, for the musical product, and for the singing ability. He said, you got to be a singer on your instrument, and vocal style. And that was what my teacher, Harold Wright, was all about too. I said, right, this is what we do all the time. We emulate the vocal style. We have a vocal concept, and that's what drives my playing. Drives my, and so, and obviously Larry was of the same mentality, and we played chamber music together, and we had the Chicago Symphony Winds together. Now I got to show you pictures. I've got some. First of all, I took out some of these recordings, because this is the very first recording I made with the Chicago Symphony.
What is this? Petrushka. Oh man, with James Levine. Wow. When I joined the CSO, this was still with Clark. Clark was playing principal clarinet in this. But when I joined, my first season was at Ravinia. And my very first piece I played was at the Mahler Second. My very first piece in the CSO was at Ravinia. And then like a couple of weeks later, we did Petrushka, and that was my very first recording. So we went into Medina Temple, which is a place where the CSO used to do a lot of recordings, and that was a wonderful recording site. Now, unfortunately, it's been converted to Bloomingdale's.
Yeah, it's a real tragedy, because the acoustics of that place were legendary, and they had a receding acoustic, so it was spacious but resonant, and so I made several chamber music recordings there. So in 1979, I formed Chicago Pro Musica, which is a chamber music group made of people in the orchestra. And we made our Grammy Award-winning recordings there of the Soldiers.
Yes, that's right. You recorded The Soldier's Tale. And
All right.
we lost you for a second, but you said The Soldier's Tale, and you got a Grammy for that.
We won the Grammy. We won the Grammy in 1985 because it took them a couple years to issue these recordings through Reference Recordings. It was a company in California, in San Francisco, called Reference Recordings, and they came because they were interested in, you know, Chicago ProMusica, and they were interested in this legendary recording location,
Wow.
which was China Temple. So we recorded The Soldier's Tale. We recorded Till Eulenspiegel einmal anders.
Yes.
Dan, the God, you know, your famed associate, you know, my very dear friend.
Dan's incredible. Yeah, Dan is one of my favorite horn players in the whole world.
Absolutely. And, you know, and you have to hear this recording of Till Eulenspiegel.
Wow.
Players. And so we did that, and we did Facade by Walton, and we did a bunch of, you know, smaller pieces, and it was just, those were like the good old days of Chicago ProMusica. We'd make recordings.
Could you tell me a little bit about what it was like to work with Schulte and the orchestra in those days?
Well, sure. I mean, Schulte was, you know, very demanding, and it was every time, but, you know, he was so, like, every time he'd come back from being away from us, he came and gave a pep talk to the orchestra. And the pep talk was always, my dears, we must raise our standard. We must always maintain our standard and raise it. This is the most important thing. Because I don't know if you heard this story, but one of those times he came back to us, and he'd always tell us what he'd done since he'd seen us last. My dears, I conducted in New York. They are good, but they are better. My dears, I conducted in Boston. They are good, but they are better. My dears, I conducted in Berlin. They are as good as we are. Better. We must raise our standard.
Wow.
And that was that kind of encapsulates the attitude that, hi, sweetheart.
they're man.
I want Teresa. Say hi to everybody.
Hey, Teresa, how are you? Great to see you. Hey, thank you for joining us today.
Yay.
So Teresa's been responsible for making some etudes and some compositions for 2 clarinets, and you guys have been recording that over the Corona break.
Yep, Teresa's made some. She's been exercising her composing skills, and we've recorded a couple of her duets for 2 clarinets.
Oh, fantastic! I can't wait to hear those. Are you going to publish those online, or are they? Are you making videos of those?
Works in progress, so we're just kind of like so far recordings.
Wow. Okay. Well, I can't wait to hear those. Thank you. Great to see you again.
Corona Cloud has brought so many silver linings. I mean, it's been so, inspiring to be like creative and to connect with musicians that we know, and just like my good friend and colleague Jim Stevenson, the composer, I've been working on his Yay-tudes.
Not Yay-tudes.
Tudes.
That's fantastic. Wow, man. And you're going to record those, aren't you?
Yeah, well, I've been kind of they're hard. So I've been working on them because I have time now.
Yeah.
And I put one of them online. I put this one called Funfetti Pony Pinata Cake on my Facebook page.
Wow, that's more notes than I see in a week.
Yeah. But each of them is meaningful. I told him every one of these notes is a gem, and he says, or a gem.
That's amazing. Hey, I just have to say a quick shout out to my friend Serge. And Serge is from the Tasmania Symphony, and Serge is a really good friend of mine. He lived in Dallas. He's a violinist. He says, "Oi, Davo. I hope you're having a great day, brother."
Goodbye, mate.
Cheers, Serge. Great to see you, man. So I guess going back to your stories about Schulte, I would love to just like hear how he inspired you, how he inspired the orchestra, and what some of your memories of that period were, whether it be great concerts or great recordings, tours.
Great, great concerts, great recordings, great tours. You know, we went on. He was very keen on spreading the word. You know, just like Maestro Muti is. So he took us on numerous tours to Europe, for example, mostly in Europe, and I got my first taste of international travel by being in the CSO because I'd never been out of the country, and so we went to Europe, and we went to London, which was where Schulte lived, and he invited the entire orchestra to his house.
Wow.
And yeah, he had to have brunch for the entire orchestra. It was so delightful and so lovely, and you could see him at home. You know, it's like we're used to seeing him on a podium and being very strong and very, you know, energetic and very demanding. Well, at home, he's just like any old dad. You know, he's at home. His girls are running around. Their dog is, you know, peeing on the carpet, and he's here. Let's get some club soda and clean that up. And it's like, except for downstairs in his music room, he had a whole line of Grammy Awards. There must have been like 30 Grammy Awards lined up behind his piano. He had two pianos, two huge grand pianos. He had all these Grammy Awards lined up behind him. And he had a book open on his desk. And we kind of went over to look on the book, and it's like, oh my gosh, this was 1978, my first European tour. This book goes until 1988. It was a 10-year calendar. And he had stuff written in, like, in 5 years, I'm going to be doing this. And in 15, you know, like, 8 years I'm going to be doing this, and all that stuff was his 10-year calendar.
Wow, unbelievable. I mean, that's so inspiring, right? Just to have that 10 years in advance, that foresightedness, but also that, like, hey, this is what I want to do, that passion and excitement and enthusiasm.
Right.
And that's one of the common denominators amongst many of the CSO players, especially yourself, is just you're so enthusiastic about music, and you're passionate about playing and giving back to the community. And I mean, just the generosity during this time period has been, you know, I mean, from you, but as, from all of our colleagues, just sharing your time and your insights and your stories. So, I mean,
I'm so delighted that you asked me to be here. And you mentioned Marlboro, and I just dragging out some recordings here. I had to show you this recording that I made with Marlboro alumni.
Yes, Marcel Moïse.
Yes,
the legendary flute player and, you know, conductor.
He was one of the greats, and I had the opportunity to study with him at Marlboro and in Brattleboro. He had a woodwind class every summer, and then he'd teach at the Marlboro School where I was in 1979 and in 1980. And so in 1980, here it is, recorded February 25th and 26th, 1980.
Wow. And can you read, we're having a hard time reading those names because it's backwards for us.
Oh,
could you just read us who was on that recording, especially the horn players?
Of course. So the horn players were Myron Bloom.
Amazing. And that was a connection from your Los Angeles friend, Mr. Mackey, correct? Richard Mackey.
Dick Mackey, second horn.
Wow.
Myron Bloom, first horn. Richard Mackey, second horn. Robert Rauch, famed New York horn player. David Jolly,
yes.
third, fourth horns. This is a group of Marlboro alumni, people that attended the Marlboro Festival over the years. My teacher, Harold Wright, his colleague that had been in the Washington National Symphony with him, Robert Genovese. Oboes, Alfred Genovese, at that time the principal oboist of the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Wayne Rapier, the second oboe. Basset horns, John Brussier.
Yeah.
Basset horn. I was privileged to play basset horn. Nancy Genovese, the second basset horn player, Robert Genovese's wife and Al Genovese's sister-in-law. the double bass player, Raymond Benner.
Oh, wow.
He in the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. And I remember he was the last one to arrive because he drove from Detroit to Boston on a very snowy day. And it was like we were all supposed to collect at the Symphony Hall, and people were trying to, gosh, where's Ray? He finally drives in with his bass in his station wagon, and boy, did he sound amazing, you know.
Wow. I mean, that's what I'm going to do after this this interview. Is I'm going to go listen to the Grand Partita with Marcel Moïse and yourself, and that'll be a wonderful rest of my Wednesday. I just want to say a quick hello to Paul Luxembourg. Paul Luxembourg is from Hong Kong, and he's a good friend of mine. He's a tuba player in the Hong Kong Philharmonic.
Hi, Paul. So my very, very good friend, dear colleague, Andy Simon.
Andy Simon, I love Andy. Oh my gosh.
And you know, our new trumpet player, Esteban Batayan, played with those guys, Paul and Andy, and boy, are they sorry that he's here, but we're happy that he's here.
Oh, Esteban's like my dear friend. So
amazing. But shout out to Hong Kong Philharmonic, where I was privileged to play in 2013 as an extra. And so my daughter, that was the very first time Molly and I ever played in an orchestra together.
No kidding.
We played in the Rite of Spring.
Oh man, with Yop? Was Yop conducting?
Actually, Yop was. This is even more ironic. Yop was in Chicago that week.
Really?
He was conducting the Bartok Concerto for Orchestra in Chicago.
Wow.
I had already accepted to go to Hong Kong, so it was a guest conductor, some Russian guy, doing the centenary concert of the Rite of Spring, and I got to hang out with. But then I came back before Yop had to leave, so I said, you know, your guys in Hong Kong did a great job in the Rite of Spring, and you know, took a picture with him, and I said, you know, sorry, Mr. Bartok, but I was in Hong Kong.
Unbelievable! Wow. I would love to just. We have about 8 minutes left. Oh my gosh! Is that Myron Bloom and Mr. Mackey?
Yes, it is.
Oh man, thank you for sharing that.
Myron and Dick, Harold.
Wow.
Mr. Harold, Al Genovese and Wayne Rapier, the oboist.
Yeah. Wow. And there you are.
Yep.
Oh man, unbelievable! Wow.
Yeah, that was an amazing time. So
we have about 10.
I told you we could easily have 10 hours of conversation on all the questions that you posed.
So we're gonna. I guess in the last 5 minutes or so, I'd love to hear one of your favorite memories from the Chicago Symphony. Just from concerts that, I mean, Chicago Symphony was like celebrity status. They played Let's Go Bears. They also did, you know, a tour, and they got a ticker tape parade when they came back from the first European tour. You know, it's like, what were some of your favorite memories of being at the Chicago Symphony?
Okay, so a lot of the really, you know, impressions that I got were created early on in my tenure in the Chicago Symphony because I was so impressionable. And in my first season in the orchestra, Carlo Maria Giulini was a guest conductor. And so probably one of my most memorable concerts ever was when we did a special pension fund concert, a one-time only. And it was an all Brahms concert. And Carlo Maria Giulini conducted the first symphony. And we did the second piano concerto, the B-flat piano concerto, and the soloist was Danielle Barenboim.
No kidding.
That has to be one of the all-time high memories of that time, of my time in the CSO. But you know, there's so many different amazing times in the orchestra. You know, more recent memories playing at Millennium Park with Maestro Muti when he first became music director, playing Pines of Rome in Millennium Park.
Yes.
And to like an overflowing crowd of like 50,000 people. They had to turn people away, you know.
Unbelievable.
You know, it's like coming back from the first European tour. I was not on that tour. That was in 1971. So that
predates you.
Predates me, but there are pictures, and you can see all the incredible, you know, civic pride that the Chicago Symphony garnered at that time. And you know, Schulte was responsible for a lot of bringing the Symphony to its prominence worldwide. And so we went to Russia for the first time with him. That was
what was that like? That was right after the fall of the USSR?
Right before.
Right before. Unbelievable.
A month before the wall came down. So, and the USSR was still the USSR. And we played in Leningrad, and we played in Moscow. And
I heard the conditions on that tour were it was, you know, the hotels were just, yeah.
It was like, and it was, you know, I would say it was an act of ambassadorship to bring our music there. And on the same tour, we played a chamber music concert, and Dan played. We did the Schubert Octet, we did the Mozart Clarinet Quintet, and we did Elliott Carter's Esprit Rude, Esprit Doux for flute and clarinet. And, you know, in those days, the Russian public was really downtrodden. You could see them. We were there in the winter. We were there in November of 1990. And it was like everybody was like lined up around the block just to get a loaf of bread or a pair of shoes. And then they were very kind of sad expression. But when we were playing our concert, you could see the life in the audience's eyes. It was like they were just brought to life, and you could tell that that's what they lived for, and that's what nourished them in really, really difficult times. Mm-hmm. And so I would say that music, art, culture is what we at this time can draw upon for nourishment of the soul, because it's so vital for our human impulses to have creativity and to have imagination and to have hope and to have, you know, optimism. And at this time, I think music and just connecting with our friends and colleagues really serves that purpose that all of us really have to embrace.
Wow. I mean, that's unbelievable. That was going to be my last question, is why is art and music so important during this time? And you just answered it perfectly. Could you give us one last tip on your positivity and just one way that you stay really inspirational?
So I don't know, maybe it's sort of my makeup, but I tend to forget things that were bad. So I tend to forget.
Yeah, like, it's really important, right?
You know, I mean, and maybe it's self-preservation, but you know, I guess like a year ago we were on strike, but I sort of forgot that. And now, you know, it's like I look at the positive aspects, and like I'm sad that we can't go on stage and you and I be together and play together, but I'm happy because we can connect this way, and I'm happy because I have time now inside. Thanks, Howard. Great to see your name. I'm happy to be able to share with the public in a novel, maybe unusual way, but that's becoming more necessary over the internet and making connections. I think connecting with people, that's one of the things that we can get inspired by our great friend and colleague Yo-Yo Ma.
Yeah.
You know, he's made a career of connecting with people, and it's humanistic. You know, never mind that he's one of the greatest musicians that ever lived, but he uses this as a way to bridge between people, between cultures, between humanity. And I think this is something that we need to always remember and, you know, just guide our lives, derive inspiration. I derive inspiration every day from you, man, from all our colleagues on the stage. Now even more because I can see you so close, and you're you know, probing, and we have to get together and do this a lot.
Well, I just have one quick thing to say. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you all for watching and for participating. Your stories, your experience, your positivity. I just adore you, John. Thank you for welcoming me to the orchestra and for helping me be a part of the Chicago Symphony. I'm so happy to be a part of it with you. And
we're so delighted that you're here, and this is the beginning of a great long friendship. And